pack all your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While you the Lucifer to light your bag, smile, boys, at the smile.
The first major battle on the Western Front in Europe during the First World War was the Battle of Marne in December 1914. German forces had made a rapid incursion into France, but they were stopped by troops around 50 kilometers north of Paris. The fighting was so heavy that both sides quite literally dug in. This started what is now known as trench warfare. Fighting trenches were usually around 12 feet deep. That's approximately 3.7 meters. Trenches were never dug in straight lines, rather they zigzagged and dog-legged. This meant an explosion in one part of a trench wouldn't be easily funneled all the way along to the other end. There were various other features to trenches, including banked earth on the lip of the trench called a parapet, and also firing steps from which soldiers fired their guns. The floor of the trench would typically be covered with wooden duck boards, a little bit like decking. This offered some drainage for water to flow underneath. Despite this, the floors of the trenches often became very muddy and very wet. Support trenches sometimes had dugouts, rooms built into the ground. These offered some protection from explosions and very cosy, if cramped, conditions for sleeping. Units or groups of soldiers were typically on the front for between a day and 2 weeks at a time before they would be replaced by more soldiers. Such short bursts of extremely dangerous duties was a new way of fighting, and therefore it required soldiers to be prepared before they departed for war. To this end, training trenches and barracks were dug all across Britain. The remains of these can often still be seen today, as shallow ditches snaking through the landscape. Here is an aerial photograph of some trenches dug on the coast in Whitley Bay. It was probably here that soldiers, such as Private Herbert Crooks, learned how to fight in the trenches. After signing up, recruits would be issued with trench orders, guidelines for living and fighting in the trenches. In addition to his uniform, a typical infantry soldier would be issued with a rifle, a bayonet, and a hand grenade. Though in practice many soldiers improvised their own weapons for close combat. This is a so-called trench club. The Germans had been quick to embrace machine gun technology, and the British soon followed. Soldiers would be trained how to use this gun efficiently and effectively. Soldiers would be trained in the use of mortars. These lobbed shells in a high arc to enemy trenches. In 1916, the British fired around 6.5 million of these. Some soldiers would be trained in the use of artillery, firing massive shells at the enemy. All soldiers received training in what to do when a barrage came. Get down, get low, try to get into a dugout. Some of these shells contained gas, such as mustard or chlorine gas. Soldiers would be trained in how to use a gas mask, how to fire while wearing a gas mask, and what this gas might do to them if they didn't. Earlier in the war, soldiers would improvise gas masks by urinating onto a handkerchief and putting it over their nose. Apparently, the wee disabled the poison. Soldiers were also given general training in how to lay out and make use of trenches. For example, between your trenches and the enemy trenches, put as many obstacles as possible. Barbed wire was particularly effective in creating a difficult terrain. When the enemy charged, they would get tangled up in the barbed wire and would be easy targets for your guns. Some soldiers from the northeast of England had very special skills. They had been miners in civilian life. In places like the Somme, they were put to use, digging underneath enemy trenches and setting off mines. These explosions could be seen from miles away. This was extremely dangerous work. The training also helped to build friendships and camaraderie before leaving for the battlefield. Hopefully the men would be able to rely on each other as much as family at home. They also learned to make the best of life. Here, for example, Australian soldiers are learning French, passing time in the trenches. Ultimately, it also helped to try and maintain a sense of humour. Here a man has drawn a cartoon showing a bomb going off near him while he was shaving. It's entitled A Close Shave. The training trenches and barracks set up across Britain could never fully prepare men for life on the front, but they were crucial in giving men a fighting chance at surviving the war.
Pack all your troubles in your old kit bag and smile.